Welcome to r/Letsnotmeet, where people post real-life encounters with child kidnappers and serial murderers. Most of my videos are focused on the humor side of Reddit, so this video is a little bit different. Let me know if you enjoyed this content and if you want to see more. I told a serial killer to F off. In 2006, I was a college student at ASU. I lived in an off-campus apartment on the ground floor, and it was a block off a major street here in Phoenix called Bystander. These details are important. In the summer of 2006, Phoenix, Arizona was plagued by two serial killers. One was the Phoenix shooter, who ended up being a team of two guys randomly shooting people. And the other was the Bystander killer, a rapist and murderer. Having two serial killers put the entire city on edge, and everyone was talking about it. I even saw articles in Time or Newsweek about the situation. So, the fall 2006 semester had just started. Now, you may have heard of this, but Phoenix is hot in August. It would get stuffy in my apartment, and so I'd leave the window cracked a little because the morning air is nice. The blinds provided visual cover. Anyways, one morning, a strange sound woke me up. It was the crack of dawn, 4:45 a.m., and the sun was just barely coming up. It was the sound of someone lightly tapping on the window, and it seemed intentional. In my tired state, I figured it could be a bird or some branches or something trivial. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. After about 90 seconds of nothing, the tapping returned, and it was absolutely purposeful. I was positive it was a human producing this noise. I thought it was my boyfriend, who thought it was cute to try and scare me sometimes. I decided I'd be a bit of a brat and make him wait, but I was also getting really angry. How dare he pull a prank when I'm trying to sleep? This is just like him. I'm going to give him a piece of my mind about disturbing my sleep like this. Tap, tap, tap. At a certain point, I got up to get a glass of water, still being in the mindset of wanting to annoy my stupid boyfriend who thought this would be funny. But I saw some movement through the slit in the blinds, and I marched over and yanked the blinds so I could see definitely not my boyfriend. I said very loudly, "What the freak?" He sort of seemed taken back by my anger, but only slightly. The man I saw will be with me forever, or more specifically, his eyes, and the feeling they gave me were insanely creepy. Honestly, words can't do justice to how terrifying his eyes were. They looked like black orbs with no white in them. Absolutely predatory. When I see pictures of Ted Bundy or Charles Manson, that's exactly what he looked like. Even if you saw a picture of how they looked, it's different when you experience it in person. It totally floored me. Something about this man was profoundly wrong. He was crouched down like an umpire. He had on dark pants, a dark purple shirt, and a dark Nike hat. He had dark skin. I thought he was Hispanic, but later I found out he was a light-skinned black guy. You'll find out how I learned his name later. Anyways, after I yelled, "What the freak?" at him, he whispered to me, "Can I talk to you?" If you want to know how insanely creepy that is to hear, just whisper that sentence out loud to yourself right now. It still sends chills down my spine when I think of how that sounded. His hands subtly moved towards his waist. I later learned he would blitz attack his victims, and he probably had a gun. All that separated us was a mesh screen. Now, this is about a 3-second interaction at this point. For some reason, I thought of Ted Bundy and how he'd pretended to be crippled to target his victims. I thought of my mom telling me to not be nice to strangers. Don't be afraid to be a jerk. My thinking wasn't as calculated as all that, but it was more the nano-processing of how to deal with the situation. So when he whispered that, I started yelling at him, "Hell no, get the freak out of here, douchebag." I shut the window angrily and locked it. I can't overemphasize how incredibly irritated I was that this person had the audacity to disturb my precious sleep. I laid back down and wondered if I'd been too mean. What if he needed help? But that didn't really make sense. Why would he be like tapping and whispering if he was truly in trouble? I decided he was a creep after all. I was too annoyed to go back to sleep, but I sort of laid back down. I told my roommate about an hour later, and she sort of jokingly asked if it could have been the baseline killer. When she said that, my heart sank. His face looked exactly like it did in the police sketches that were on billboards everywhere. The only problem is that those billboards showed him with dreads, and the man at my window had no dreads. Apparently, he was some sort of disguise artist who'd wear wigs. Updating the police sketch would have been a nice move, but they didn't. I called the Phoenix police, and the detective I talked to agreed that it sounded like his MO. The suspect would say something to throw off his target, and then he'd blitz attack. The detective said that my angry response probably made me seem like too much of a hassle, and he moved on. The only problem was that I thought the guy looked Hispanic, and the detective said many witnesses described him as black. I thought they might want to come and try for samples or surveillance video or something, but I didn't hear back from the detective. My parents freaked out. They got us knives, pepper spray, and put up signs. Edit, some people asked me why I didn't get a gun. I can't remember why I didn't at the time, but I remember it being something I was open to when my dad brought it up. We learned another tenant had complained that same morning. I never learned the details, but this idiot was apparently going around the dang complex trying to find a target. The stupid apartment wouldn't let us out of our lease, so we moved to a second floor apartment right above our old unit. Side note, the neighbors who moved into our old unit were horrible. Obnoxious tweakers who would do meth and play pitbull on repeat for hours and have knife fights at 11 a.m. on weekdays. There were times I wondered if they might be worse than the actual serial killer who came to my window. So that unit was cursed somehow. Anyways, on September 4th, 2006, they arrested Mark Goudreau. I think the detective didn't call me back because they were days away from arresting Goudreau. When I saw his mugshot, I was sick, but also relieved. He was absolutely the guy outside my window. To me, he looked like he could be Hispanic. You can judge for yourself if you Google it. He's on death row in Arizona now. His wife tried to mount some campaign to show that the police were framing him or something. On a personal level, it certainly would make for an interesting coincidence if this poor innocent man who they framed was also whispering like a creep and tapping my window. The other cool thing about this story is that I had a really bad eating disorder at the time, and about 8 months after this happened, I got in solid recovery. I never would have experienced how wonderful life could be if the slightest thing would have changed that morning in 2006. I can't think of something more scary than a serial killer tapping on your window. That actually happened to me, and if it happens to you, just scare them right back. Don't be afraid to be downright rude to someone who's injecting themselves into your space. It could save your life if you're not afraid to throw your weight around and tell someone off. Trust yourself. You can still be a kind and generous person and still tell someone to F off. I honestly don't know what's crazier about this story. Is it that OP's life was saved because she woke up in a bad mood? Or is it that right after cussing out a serial killer, she laid back down in her bed to go back to sleep? If that happened to me, I don't know if I could sleep for a week. My husband and I were at the supermarket and our baby was being especially fussy. So he took her for a quick drive, the motion of which usually calms her down. It only took about 10 minutes to settle her and I was still in the store, but was unsure how much longer I'd be and there's poor cell reception inside. So he pulled back into the parking lot to wait for me. It was an unseasonably nice day, so he took her in her car seat to sit on one of those benches outside the store. He took a business call and had just sat her down, absent-mindedly rocking the carrier when a woman, well-dressed, mid-30s, average height, fit build, approached them. It's not uncommon for people to ask to play with our baby. She's got big rosy cheeks, soft wisps of gold hair, and the most adorable gurgly toothless grin, especially when she's deep into a good nap. But her nap schedule is paramount, so my husband was preparing to tell the woman she actually couldn't play with our baby right then. She walked over right in their direction, brimming with nonchalant confidence, and before he can even finish his sentence explaining she was napping and not to be touched, she picked up the carrier and started walking off. He was in shock for a minute, not fully believing someone could be ballsy enough to do something so sinister in plain daylight. So he said, "Excuse me, put her down," as his panic mounted. She remained calm this entire time, but when he called after her, she started walking away more briskly than when she'd approached. He ran full speed ahead to grapple the carrier out of her hands, finally resulting to restraining her arms. This woman yells, "Help! He's trying to take my baby! Kidnapping! 911! Help!" kicking him in the shin and pulling a pink bottle of pepper spray out of her handbag. Of course, no one in the parking lot was clocking the earlier interaction and assumed he really was a kidnapper. A lone man in a Deadpool t-shirt versus a tiny, well-dressed woman. Immediately, a man knocked my husband to the ground and was holding him down. He could hear bystanders encouraging the woman to file a police report, but she was doing a very convincing job of acting shaken up and insisted she just wanted to get home. To make matters worse for my husband, she was driving a minivan. He was in a raw state of panic, realizing the entire parking lot had banded together to inadvertently facilitate the kidnapping of our daughter. He was begging and pleading with them, but no one was listening. They just kept screaming at him that the jig was up and he needed to lie still and wait for police and stop terrorizing a young mother. My husband finally had the novel idea to show them family pictures on his phone. But too panicked to think clearly, this manifested as him shouting, "I have pictures of the baby on my phone!" Which, of course, everyone interpreted as him having either stalking photos or worse. It was at this point that a man, I can't entirely blame the man considering what he thought was going on, kicked my husband as hard as he could in the ribs. It was at this point I was coming out of the store and I thought he was being robbed by these people. I was yelling for security, so panicked my chest constricted and I could barely get any sound out. It was only then I realized he did not have our baby with him. When I saw she was being held by a woman, I was relieved. I thought maybe the woman had intervened to move my daughter out of harm's way while my husband was being robbed and was walking away to get help. I couldn't find a security guard outside the store, so I ran up to the people holding my husband down, waving my wallet, pleading, "Take everything you want, just let up and leave us alone." And one of the men holding him down said something like, "Lady, we need to wait for police to deal with them." And I was so confused. Why would the muggers have called the police? I just kept stammering, "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" And made out someone saying, "He tried to abduct that woman's kid." I did not understand and was sure I'd misheard him. My husband would never hurt a child, and we have 4 kids. If he were going to commit a crime, bringing home another kid would be at the bottom of his list. I kept trying to understand what the man was saying, and suddenly, it all clicked. I looked around for the woman who had the baby carrier, and she was halfway across the parking lot. I went into total ballistic tiger cub mode, literally leapt out of my heels and sprinted across the parking lot. I'm not a UFC fighter. I've never even taken a self-defense class, so all I could think to do was grab the woman by her hair and squeeze her throat with my other hand, which didn't do much. She was getting away even as I grappled her. Amazingly, none of the other bystanders had yet to connect that my husband was telling the truth and that this woman was absconding with my baby. I yanked on her hair as hard as I could, and that was enough to make her drop the carrier. I was so scared and surprised that I actually just threw myself on top of the carrier, covering the entire thing like a blanket, and stayed that way without saying or doing anything else. The woman left. Not one person tried to stop her, even though she was clearly leaving without the child she claimed was hers, which would be pretty incriminating if I'd watched this scene unfold. Within the next couple minutes, police had arrived. After all that, there were still several bystanders who explained it as my husband trying to kidnap the baby. The police, to my horror, assumed that she must not have had bad intentions. The first questions they asked me after getting her description weren't investigative. They were questions thinly veiled trying to convince me not to pursue charges, still placing blame on my husband. A small sampling. Do your husband and the baby look dissimilar? Is there a chance she thought he was abducting the baby and she was trying to intervene? Could your husband have been doing something inappropriate or violent to the baby that would make her feel compelled to extricate the baby from the situation? Did she seem groggy or confused? Could she have mistaken either of them for her own family members? They spent more time verifying that the baby was actually mine than they concerned themselves with the fact that the baby was not actually hers. My husband had called his brothers at that point, who works in an office with a lot of lawyers, and connected with one ASAP, who gave us the priceless advice to get every officer's name and badge number, to request copies of the store security tapes right away, and to escalate our complaint higher up the chain if these officers weren't taking us seriously. Finally, we had reason enough to believe we were being taken seriously, and we went home, and both just shook and cried until we had to get our other kids from school. My husband is seething with rage and grappling with a feeling of helplessness from how little he was able to do, and has 2 cracked ribs from when the man kicked him. To the officer's credit, they did ask if he'd like to press charges, but considering the man was genuinely convinced at the time that he was on the right side of intervening in a kidnapping and stayed to talk to police and apologized profusely when the truth became clear, he declined to press charges. Amazingly and frustratingly, there were still people who stuck around to talk to police who were giving my husband dirty looks, and one man who even implored the police to involve Child Protective Services to verify it was really our baby. Parking lot kidnapper and parking lot skeptics, you better hope we don't meet. What's so scary about this story is how incredibly easy it was for that woman to get everyone on her side and potentially steal that kid. I mean, if that father had gone to the grocery store alone and not with his wife, then I guess that kid would have just been kidnapped and there wasn't anything he really could have done about it. That was r/Letsnotmeet, and I know you guys are accustomed to coming to my channel for just jokes and a light sense of humor, but the stories on Letsnotmeet are so intense. I just wanted to share a couple with you to see if you guys want more. So let me know down in the comments if you want to see more of these sort of like really serious and heavy but still super interesting stories.